Welcome back to this complete beginner whittling lesson. This is part 3 of the Whittling Little People lesson. And in part 1, we took our square piece of wood and we whittled it into this cylinder. In part 2, we took that cylinder and we separated the head from the body, but not in a bad kind of way, to create this shape. And in part 3 of the video, we are going to finish the shape of our little people by rounding off the top. So we're going to go from this to this in this last video here. Okay. Now, as you know from the first couple videos in the series, this is a lesson, not a tutorial. The difference is that I'm going to explain every step that we take, the reason that we're doing it, and I'm going to teach you specific skills while we go. So in the Little People Part 3 lesson, you will watch this video. You will be able to round the end of a square piece of wood, and you will be able to identify which direction to carve with the grain. So let's begin. Here's the guy we've been whittling on, and in our last step, we are going to round the top of the head. We already rounded the bottom third, I should say, of the head. We're going to round the top part of the head, and we're going to talk about rounding in a couple different ways. So let's get started. I'm going to use a push cut, which you learned in part 1, to push from the line at the top third up to the top, just like that. And just like in the last video, I'm going to follow that pattern all the way around, just like that. And I'm going to keep that going until I have made it all the way around the top. Now, you might be doing just a little bit, you might be getting deep, you might wonder how far in should I be pushing. Well, you can get comfortable with that, and you can always do multiple cuts, so it's not a big deal. You notice I had a little tiny bit of a knot there, but I was able to just carve right through it, no worries. And I would say you want to get it about the same angle that you did on the bottom third, and that might be a little bit difficult to estimate. But I'm going to go around twice like I did last time, and the second time I'm going to go right over the edges like that, the hard edges that I had, and that's going to let me just bring it down a little bit more. Okay. So we'll keep doing that, and I've made it around twice now. So the next thing I'm going to do is similar to as we did on the bottom part. I'm going to go halfway between where I started and the top, and I'm going to do the same thing from here halfway up. Now, something to note here, I'm going to need to go in across. If I'm going to make this all the way around, I'm going to have to push hard and get across, okay? So I'm still doing a push cut, but I'm going to push a little bit harder. And if you got a sharp knife, it should be able to handle this kind of cut. And you know it's sharp if it's shiny. You see that fast? See how shiny that is? That's how I know that the knife is sharp. Okay, I'm doing that halfway across. But the other thing you'll notice is that I'm being intentional about which part of the blade I'm using. I'm not using the tip for this. I'm using ideally the back half of the blade for this. The back half of the blade is going to be a little bit stronger. It's going to be a little bit thicker back there, and it's going to be able to handle the extra pressure and going across the grain, because really what I'm doing is I'm cutting deeper across the grain, and that makes it a little bit harder for me to do it. So using the back end of my knife and not the tip of my knife is going to make that a little bit easier. So let me pause for a second there and talk about carving in the right direction of the grain. So imagine that the wood grain, we'll look at it on the paper here. Imagine that the wood grain looks like this. And you can imagine that each one of those is a little fiber of wood going straight down. You can imagine them as straws. It would be a good way to visualize them, or little sticks. Okay, what's going to be easier for me when I'm carving that piece of wood? It's going to be to carve up like this, because on each piece I'm carving off the edge. Imagine what it would look like if I had my grains like this, and I brought my knife down like that. Well, the tip, as I'm trying to push into there, would be getting caught and drug deeper. Be getting caught and put down in to the knife like that. And I would end up with a really jagged edge. Now, you're going to naturally do this probably. Most people are going to naturally do this and say, yeah, of course I'm carving up towards the top. That's how you carved your marshmallow sticks as a kid and everything else, right? I'm not going to turn it around and go like this, right? Well, no, you're probably not going to do that. But what's going to happen as you do more whittling is that you're going to find situations where maybe you want to clean this up down here and you start to think, oh, I'm going to do this. Well, that's carving against the grain, right? It only makes sense for me to do that here because if I'm looking at the grain this way, okay, carving up like that is going to be carving with the grain, but carving down like that is not. And there will be situations where you're forced to carve against the grain, okay? And when you're forced to carve against the grain, you want to make sure your knife is really sharp and that you're being careful with it, and that'll happen in some projects, but not in this project. So the other thing to notice is that that is relevant for what we're doing right now in shaping this head is that imagine what's going to be easier. Is it going to be easier if my fibers are like this and I'm making a cut like that? Or is it going to be easier if my fibers are like this and I'm making a cut like that? Or even, let's say they're flat and I'm making a cut like that. Okay, well, this is obviously going to be a lot easier because I'm carving a steeper really, I should say, more shallow along the edge. It's not going to catch much on those fibers, right? But if I start carving across the top, it's going to get harder because I'm carving straight across those fibers, whereas these are coming in at an angle. And if I start carving all the way across the top, it's going to be even harder. So that means that as I continue to round this head, those cuts are going to get harder. Don't be discouraged by that as a beginner. That's going to just be the case. And you're going to learn how to hold your knife a little bit more firm. You're going to learn how to hold your carving a little bit more firm and make those clean cuts. So with that, you know how to carve the right direction. You know why we're carving the direction we are. It's not super complicated on this, but on other projects, it'll be more complicated at times. And I'm going to do my next step, which is that I'm going to split from here to the top in half again. I'm going to carve across. Now at this point, I'm carving almost straight across the grain. I've got to push harder, okay, but I'm still doing it in a really controlled kind of way. I'm not flailing my knife around like crazy. I'm doing it in a very controlled way, okay? I'm going to keep doing that until that little white spot on top is shaved all the way across. And I can actually do that straight across with this knife. That's how sharp and how strong it is, right? Okay. Now, I'm pretty close to being done. There's a few things that I'm going to do to finish rounding this off, but that was my technique for rounding off the top of my head. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to clean this up a little bit. So these sides are still pretty flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back around both ways. I'm going to shave off really small, just a really small cut right along the edge where you can kind of see the pencil line was still there. Keep rotating and do that all the way around, just small, shaving that hard corner off the set edge. That's going to help me finish off the shaping of my head. Okay. All right. Then I'm going to turn it around so that I'm carving again with the grain, going this direction now. This is curved in, so this way direction will be with the grain. I'm going to do the same thing down here. And that's going to take off the two kind of flat edges of the head where they had been. And that'll just add a little bit more roundness to my head. There. Now I'm going to call that done. Now you might look at it and you might say, hey, that's not a perfect sphere. And I'd say, hey, that's okay. I like it. I like the facets. I like that I can see that it was hand carved, and that's cool. You can spend as much time as you want doing this, you know, shaving off little hard corners if you want to. That's fine. And sometimes I spend more time than others, but I like it. I like that rough shape, and you shouldn't feel like you have to do anything more than that. Okay. So I've got a nice shape for the head. Now, the second type of rounding that I want to talk about is not just rounding, you know, across the top of the shape, but we've got this really hard edge right here at the corner of the body, kind of the shoulders, if you can imagine that. So I want to round that. I think it'll just look a little bit nicer. You can see the difference here. Okay. So to round that, there's two different things that I can do. First thing that I can do is I can take the tip of my knife and I can shave right along the edge and kind of round it like that. Okay, nothing wrong with that. That's a good way to do that. But things to note if I'm doing that, you always want to pay attention to where the tip is. When you're doing these rounding kind of cuts with the tip of your knife, it would be very easy for me to lose track of that and start cutting the bottom of this poor guy's face. And that wouldn't be very nice. He would not enjoy that. So I'm going to be really careful to just use the tip, and I'm going to be careful that it doesn't poke up into his face. And you can see my knife is nice and sharp. I can do that fairly easily. Okay. The other way that I might do that is I might just use a push cut with the side of my knife. Now, if I'm going to do that, I have a similar danger that if I push too hard, I'm going to just hit him in the chin with the knife, maybe even harder. He also would not enjoy that. So if I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm applying a lot of counter pressure with my fingers on my right hand as I'm doing that, so that when I slide over that, I don't lose control and it doesn't pop off. Okay, and I can do that, and I can make easy little cuts just to keep it around like that. So I'm sloping those shoulders ever so slightly. I'm not making a hard cut because I would bump into our poor guy, but I'm doing a soft cut like that. Now, there's still a little bit of a hard edge there. If you wanted to, you could come in and do a similar kind of thing and just, clean that up. And you could do as much or as little bit as you can. I saw a little bit of a wood booger there I got to get out. All right. So that's it. In 3 parts, we have whittled the little people. And if you don't like having it as a little person, it's a microphone, right? It's a shooting star. It's whatever you want it to be. So you can paint those up, and the kids, grandkids, anybody in your life, who wouldn't love getting a cute little person that you whittled yourself? So I hope that's been a helpful beginner carving lesson for you. Throughout the series, you learned how to do push cuts, stop cuts. You learned how to shape a square into a cylinder. You learned how to round the top of a head. Those are all skills you can use in other whittling projects as you move forward. And I hope you do so. Thanks for watching. Happy whittling.